At 9 o'clock on February 19th, 1945, Corporal Tony Stein crouched behind a shallow depression in the black volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, gripping a weapon that his sergeant had called a stupid idea just 3 months earlier. The young Marine was just 23 years old, with 6 combat missions behind him and 0 conventional kills to his name. The Japanese had fortified every meter of this 8-square-mile volcanic rock with 11 miles of interconnected tunnels, 17,000 defenders, and overlapping fields of fire that turned the beach into an absolute killing ground. Stein was among the first men from Company A, 1st Battalion, 28th Marines to establish a position beyond the beach, and around him Marines were pinned down by concentrated machine gun and mortar fire from camouflaged pillboxes they simply could not see. By mid-morning, the 5th Marine Division had already lost 43 men, with dead Marines scattered across the terraced beach, their bodies twisted and broken in the volcanic ash. The standard-issue Browning M1919 machine guns were effective weapons, but they weighed 31 pounds empty and fired 400 rounds per minute, which made them good for defense but terrible for assault. Tony Stein had understood this problem for months, ever since November 1944 at Camp Maui in Hawaii, when he had watched machine gun crews struggle during training exercises. The gunners could not keep up with advancing rifle platoons. They would set up, fire, then spend minutes breaking down and moving forward, by which time the momentum of the assault had completely disappeared. Tony Stein was a toolmaker by trade, born in Dayton, Ohio, to Austrian Jewish immigrants who had fled anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe. He had spent his teenage years working a lathe at Patterson Field before becoming a tool and die maker at Dello Products. He understood machines, understood what they could do and what they could not do. When he joined the Paramarines in September 1942, that mechanical mind went with him to Bougainville, where he killed 5 Japanese snipers in a single day, though it was his ability to modify equipment that caught the attention of Sergeant Mel Grevich. Grevich had been experimenting with something unusual during the Bougainville campaign in 1943. He had salvaged an AM-2 aircraft machine gun from a crashed Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber, and the AM-2 weighed only 21 pounds, 10 pounds lighter than the M1919, and could fire 1,200 to 1,500 rounds per minute, 3 times faster than the standard Marine Corps machine gun. But there was a significant problem. The AM-2 had spade grips designed for aircraft mounts, with no stock, no sights, and no way for a single Marine to carry it and fire accurately while advancing through enemy territory. When Grevich approached Stein in November 1944, the Paramarines had just been disbanded, and both men had been reassigned to the 28th Marines in the 5th Marine Division, preparing for an operation the brass would not name yet, but everyone knew would be ugly. Grevich showed Stein the AM-2, and Stein immediately saw the potential. They worked at night in a maintenance shed, with Stein cutting down an M1 Garand buttstock and hollowing it out to accept the machine gun's buffer tube. He fabricated a solenoid trigger mechanism from sheet metal scraps, while Grevich welded a Browning automatic rifle bipod to the front and added BAR rear sights for aiming. The result was crude, weighing 25 pounds, fed by a 100-round ammunition box capable of emptying that box in just 5 seconds of continuous fire. They called it the Stinger. Stein built 6 of these weapons, 1 for each of Company G's 3 rifle platoon sergeants, 1 for the demolition section, 1 for Grevich, and 1 for himself. The reaction from other Marines was decidedly mixed. Some called it brilliant, while others called it a death trap. One sergeant looked at the improvised weapon and declared it would jam on the first burst. Another said the thin barrel would melt after 2 magazines. A platoon commander from 2nd Battalion said only an idiot would carry a plain gun into an infantry fight. But when Stein test-fired it on the range, emptying a full box into a target at 200 yards in under 6 seconds, the skeptics went quiet. Company commanders approved it, battalion approved it, and the Stinger was going to war. Now, on the beach at Iwo Jima, Stein tightened his grip on the weapon with the barrel already warm from the combat he was about to enter. Around him, Marines were dying because they could not locate the hidden Japanese positions. Standard procedure was to call for tanks or naval gunfire, but the tanks were bogged down in the soft volcanic ash, and naval shells could not hit what they could not see. Stein made a decision that would change everything. He stood up fully upright in the middle of the beach where Japanese machine gunners had overlapping fields of fire, deliberately exposing himself to draw enemy attention. He needed them to reveal their positions. He needed to see the muzzle flashes. Bullets snapped past his head while mortar rounds detonated in the ash nearby. And then Stein saw it. A pillbox 75 yards to the northwest, camouflaged with volcanic rock and sand. The barrel of a Type 92 heavy machine gun protruding just inches from the position. Stein lowered the Stinger, aimed, and squeezed the solenoid trigger. The weapon roared to life at 1,200 rounds per minute. The pillbox disintegrated under the torrent of .30 caliber rounds as 1,200 bullets per minute hammered the volcanic rock and sandbags. The Type 92 fell silent, and through the dust and smoke, Stein could see movement inside the position before it went completely still. He shifted his aim to a second pillbox 40 yards to the left, another 5-second burst of continuous fire. The concrete structure absorbed some rounds, but the sheer volume of fire was overwhelming, and the Japanese machine gun crew stopped shooting. Around Stein, Marines began to move, as seeing the enemy position suppressed allowed riflemen to advance from their shallow depressions in the sand. Sergeants shouted orders, and the assault started moving again. Stein charged the first pillbox, the Stinger lighter than the standard M1919, allowing him to run with it, reaching the position in seconds to find 3 Japanese soldiers dead inside, the M1919 rate of fire having simply cut through everything. He moved to the second pillbox with the same result, 2 enemy soldiers down and the position destroyed. But then Stein felt the Stinger go light in his hands. The ammunition box was empty, 100 rounds gone in less than 10 seconds of actual trigger time. He had anticipated this problem in training in Hawaii, but experiencing it in combat was something else entirely. The Stinger was devastating, but it was also impossibly hungry for ammunition. Stein looked back towards the beach 200 yards away, where the ammunition resupply point was located, near the waterline, where landing craft were still unloading supplies under sporadic mortar fire. He would have to cross open ground, fully exposed, to get more linked .30 caliber ammunition. He started running, but the volcanic ash made every step difficult, not like normal sand, but loose, terraced, and giving way underfoot. Marines called it running through ball bearings, and Stein's boots sunk 3 inches with each stride. Halfway to the beach, he passed a wounded Marine with a shrapnel wound to the left leg, who was conscious but could not walk. He grabbed him, slung him over his shoulder, and kept running. The Marine weighed 160 pounds, the Stinger weighed 25, and Stein's combat pack added another 30, meaning he was carrying over 215 pounds through volcanic ash while Japanese mortars bracketed the beach. He reached the ammunition resupply point at 9:45, handed the wounded Marine to corpsmen, grabbed 4 boxes, each containing 100 rounds of linked .30 caliber, stuffed 2 boxes into his pack, carried 1 in each hand, and turned back towards his platoon's position. The return trip took 3 minutes as Japanese snipers had started targeting Marines moving between the beach and forward positions, bullets kicking up black ash around Stein's boots, and a mortar round detonated 30 yards to his right, throwing volcanic rock and shrapnel. When Stein reached Company A's position, his platoon sergeant pointed to a third pillbox, this one larger and reinforced concrete with a Type 96 light machine gun covering the approach to the airfield. 2 previous assaults had failed, and 4 Marines lay dead in front of it. Stein loaded a fresh ammunition box into the Stinger, checked the belt feed, and the weapon was already hot from the previous engagement, but the thin aircraft barrel could handle more. He stood up and advanced on the pillbox alone as the Type 96 opened fire immediately, with rounds snapping past his head and chest. He kept walking forward with the Stinger at his shoulder, and at 50 yards opened fire, the weapon's rate of fire so high that the Japanese gunner could not adjust his aim fast enough. Stein's rounds found the firing slit, and the enemy gun went silent. He charged the final 20 yards and dropped a grenade through the opening, the explosion killing the 3-man crew inside. Stein turned back to reload and found the ammunition box empty again. He had been in combat for 46 minutes and had already gone through 300 rounds. The Stinger was proving its worth, but the logistical problem was becoming clear. This weapon could suppress and destroy enemy positions faster than any standard machine gun, but would require constant resupply. He started his second run to the beach, this time finding 2 wounded Marines on the way down, one with a sucking chest wound and another who had lost part of his right hand to shrapnel. Stein could not carry both, so he took the chest wound case first, ran him to Corpsman, grabbed more ammunition, and made a third trip specifically to retrieve the second wounded man. By 10:30, Stein had made 4 trips to the beach and back, each time carrying a wounded Marine to safety and each time returning with ammunition. His platoon had advanced 300 yards from the beach, approaching the first airfield with Japanese resistance intensifying as the enemy had constructed a defensive network of pillboxes, spider holes, and underground bunkers connected by tunnels, with soldiers emerging from one location after another was destroyed to resume firing. The Stinger was the only weapon in Company A that could deliver enough volume of fire to keep multiple positions suppressed simultaneously, and when Stein opened up on one pillbox, the sheer sound of 1,200 rounds per minute was enough to make adjacent positions hesitate, giving riflemen time to advance and throw grenades. At 11:20, Stein's platoon encountered a reinforced Japanese position that had stopped the advance of 2 other companies, a concrete bunker with 3 firing slits positioned to cover the approach to Airfield No. 1, multiple Type 96 light machine guns inside with interlocking fields of fire. 2 tank destroyers had tried to knock it out, but both were hit by concealed 47mm anti-tank guns and withdrew. An airstrike was called in, but the bombs missed by 50 yards. The bunker remained operational. Stein studied the position, the firing slits narrow at maybe 8 inches wide and 4 inches tall, difficult targets, but the Stinger's rate of fire meant that if he aimed at a slit and held the trigger, statistically some rounds would get through. He advanced alone, went prone at 50 yards from the bunker, and opened fire. The Stinger emptied its 100-round box in 7 seconds, with at least 30 rounds going through the firing slits at that range, and the Japanese guns went silent. Stein reloaded, charged the bunker, and dropped grenades through the slits, killing the 5-man crew inside. Company A's advance resumed. His 7th trip to the beach came at 11:50, this time carrying a Marine who had lost both legs below the knee to a mine, the man still conscious and screaming. Stein ran the entire 200 yards while the Marine bled into his uniform, and Corpsman later said if Stein had been 30 seconds slower, the Marine would have died from blood loss. On the return trip, Stein encountered another Marine carrying a Stinger, one of Grevich's other gunners from Company G, whose weapon had jammed permanently after overheating, with the barrel warped and most likely banked. Stein looked at his own Stinger, the barrel discolored purple from heat and the wooden furniture on the Garand stock starting to char, but it still fired.
He made his 8th trip to the beach at 12:30, another wounded Marine and another load of ammunition, and by now other Marines had started to notice the Barefoot Corporal making repeated runs under fire. Some thought he was crazy, others thought he was the bravest man on Iwo Jima. Stein did not think about bravery, he thought about mathematics. His platoon needed ammunition, wounded men needed evacuation, he was faster without boots, and the Stinger gave him the firepower to suppress positions while he moved. Everything else was just execution. But on his 8th return trip, something changed. A Japanese sniper had moved into position overlooking the supply route, and as Stein ran back toward Company A with 4 ammunition boxes, a round snapped past his head close, maybe 6 inches. He dropped flat in the volcanic ash with the Stinger beside him, and for the first time that day, Tony Stein was pinned down. The sniper was good, and Stein could not see the position, but the angle of the shot told him it was somewhere on the ridgeline 200 yards to the east, probably in a spider hole or behind volcanic rock. Japanese snipers were trained to be patient, disciplined, and willing to wait hours for a single high-value target, and a Marine making repeated trips across open ground was definitely high value. Stein lay motionless for 30 seconds, controlling his breathing, knowing the sniper would be watching for any movement. The volcanic ash around his position showed no cover, just flat, open terrain between the beach and the forward positions. Another round cracked overhead, the sniper firing at where Stein had been rather than where he was, meaning the shooter had not acquired his exact location yet. Stein had maybe 10 seconds before the sniper adjusted. He rolled left, grabbed the Stinger, and came up running, not towards his platoon, but towards the sniper.
The mathematics were simple. Running perpendicular to the sniper's line of sight would make him a harder target than running away, and if he could close the distance, the Stinger's rate of fire would overwhelm a bolt-action rifle. 3 more shots, all misses, and Stein was sprinting now, barefoot through the volcanic ash with the Stinger in his hands and ammunition boxes bouncing in his pack. At 150 yards, he saw movement, a figure in a spider hole partially concealed by volcanic rock. Stein dropped to one knee and opened fire. The Stinger roared, 1,200 rounds per minute shredding the rock and surrounding terrain until the sniper's position disintegrated. When the ammunition box ran empty, there was no return fire. Stein reloaded, approached the position carefully, found the sniper dead with the Type 97 rifle beside him, took the rifle's telescopic sight, and continued toward Company A. When he reached his platoon at 1300 hours, the situation had deteriorated. Company A had been pinned down by a complex of fortifications that included at least 8 pillboxes arranged in a semicircle with interlocking fields of fire. Any Marine who stood up was immediately engaged by multiple positions, and the company had taken 12 casualties in the past 20 minutes trying to advance. Tank support had been called, but the M4 Shermans were still bogged down near the beach, the volcanic ash too soft for the tracked vehicles. Artillery support was limited because forward observers could not get clear lines of sight to the enemy positions. Stein moved to the forwardmost position and assessed the situation. 8 pillboxes forming an arc about 100 yards ahead, with Japanese soldiers moving through connecting trenches in a coordinated system rather than just static defense. The Stinger's advantage was volume of fire, and Stein calculated that if he could suppress multiple positions simultaneously, riflemen could advance under that suppression, but it would require exposing himself again. He stood up and opened fire on the leftmost pillbox, a 5-second burst of 100 rounds silencing the position, then shifted aim to the next pillbox with another burst, bringing silence. He methodically worked his way across the arc, suppressing each position in sequence, while Japanese soldiers in the trenches began firing at him with Type 99 rifles and Type 96 light machine guns. Rounds kicked up ash around his feet. One bullet struck the Stinger's barrel with a metallic clang, but the weapon kept firing. Stein emptied his ammunition box and dropped flat to reload, while riflemen from Company A advanced 50 yards. When he stood up and resumed firing, they advanced another 50 yards.
The coordination was instinctive, no orders needed, as the Marines understood that when the Stinger was firing, they could move. By 1330, Company A had broken through the defensive arc, with 5 of the 8 pillboxes destroyed and the other 3 abandoned. 17 Japanese soldiers confirmed dead, while Company A had lost 3 more Marines, but the advance continued. Stein's Stinger was now critically damaged. The barrel was bent slightly from the bullet strike, the bipod had broken off completely, and the Garand stock was charred black, but it still fired. At 1345, during the assault on the 6th pillbox, something happened that Stein had trained for, but hoped would never occur. He was firing a sustained burst when a Japanese Type 96 machine gun scored a direct hit on the Stinger. The impact was violent, the weapon ripped from Stein's hands and thrown 6 feet backward into the volcanic ash. Stein dove for cover behind a low ridge of rock, now unarmed, with the Stinger lying in open ground between his position and the active enemy pillbox. Japanese soldiers had seen it fall and knew he was disarmed, waiting for him to try to retrieve it. Stein looked at the weapon lying in the ash, the barrel smoking, and he could see that the belt feed mechanism was damaged. Even if he retrieved it, the Stinger might not fire. But he had carried that weapon through 8 trips to the beach, used it to destroy more than 15 enemy positions, and it had kept his platoon alive. Stein prepared to run into the open and retrieve it, sprinting as the Japanese machine gun opened fire. Rounds snapped past his head and torso as he ran in a zigzag pattern, making himself a harder target. 3 seconds to reach the Stinger, grabbing it and rolling behind another ridge to check the weapon. The belt feed was jammed, a round having struck the feed mechanism and bent the guide rails. Stein pulled out the damaged belt, cleared the jam with his fingers, loaded a fresh ammunition box, and the weapon fed correctly. He test-fired a 3-round burst. It worked, and he stood up, emptying the entire box into the pillbox that had shot the Stinger from his hands. 100 rounds in 7 seconds, the position obliterated. By 1400 hours, Company A had advanced 400 yards from the beach, destroyed 23 enemy positions, and Stein had personally accounted for at least 12 of them. His barefoot runs to the beach had saved 9 wounded Marines, and the Stinger, despite being shot, overheated, and mechanically abused, was still firing. But the weapon's condition was critical. The barrel bent visibly, with rate of fire decreased to maybe 900 rounds per minute, the solenoid trigger firing in bursts of 3 to 5 rounds, even when Stein wanted continuous fire, and the wooden stock so charred it was starting to crumble.
At 1430, during an assault on a fortified trench system, the Stinger was hit again, this time a Type 99 rifle round striking the receiver and knocking the weapon from Stein's hands for the second time, landing 10 feet away in a shell crater. Stein was now completely exposed with no cover and no weapon, Japanese soldiers in the trench firing at him with rifles and grenades. He could see at least 6 enemy combatants, ran for the Stinger as a grenade exploded 5 yards behind him, throwing volcanic ash and shrapnel that hit his left leg and back. Small wounds, but not incapacitating. He grabbed the Stinger and dove into the crater, the receiver having a deep gouge from the bullet strike. He cycled the action manually, stiff but functional, loaded a fresh belt, aimed at the trench, and fired. The Stinger worked, barely. Rate of fire down to maybe 600 rounds per minute, but 600 rounds per minute was still faster than anything else on the battlefield. Stein suppressed the trench while riflemen advanced with grenades. The position cleared with 6 Japanese soldiers dead. By 1500 hours, Stein had made 8 trips to the beach and back, fired over 2,000 rounds, carried wounded Marines on every single return trip, his feet bloody from running barefoot through volcanic ash, uniform soaked with sweat and the blood of wounded men, and the Stinger was barely functional. The barrel bent at a 5-degree angle, the stock held together by friction and hope, the solenoid trigger firing randomly, with Stein manually cycling the action between bursts.
but Company A had reached its objective at the base of Mount Suribachi, the volcanic peak that dominated the southern tip of the island, 550 feet above sea level, with Japanese observers on the summit able to see every American position on the beach. At 1700 hours, Stein's platoon was ordered to establish a defensive perimeter and hold their position overnight, the assault on Suribachi beginning the next morning. Stein finally had time to assess his own condition. Feet torn and bleeding with volcanic ash worked into every cut, turning them into infected wounds. Shrapnel fragments in his left calf and lower back, hands blistered from carrying the hot stinger, and exhaustion from 8 hours of continuous combat, having run approximately 3 miles total across those 8 trips to the beach, carrying wounded men, carrying ammunition, under fire, barefoot. The stinger lay beside him in the fighting hole, the weapon destroyed, with barrel needing replacement, receiver damaged, stock burned, and trigger mechanism unreliable. But it had done its job keeping Company A moving forward when conventional weapons would have left them pinned on the beach. That night, while Stein tried to sleep in his fighting hole, Japanese infiltrators began probing Company A's perimeter in small groups of 2 or 3 soldiers, testing the defenses. Stein grabbed the stinger. Despite its damage, it still had one advantage: volume of fire. When a Japanese soldier appeared 30 yards from his position, Stein fired a burst and the weapon worked, the infiltrator dying before dawn. On February 20th, at 800 hours, the assault on Mount Suribachi began with Company A and the rest of the 28th Marines climbing the volcanic slopes, the terrain brutal with loose ash and no vegetation, and exposed ridges where Japanese observers could see every movement. The enemy had fortified the mountain with over 60 pillboxes, bunkers, and cave positions, with every approach covered by interlocking fields of fire. Stein carried the stinger up the mountain with an armorer having worked on it overnight, replacing the most damaged components, the barrel still bent, but a new belt feed mechanism installed, and solenoid trigger were reliable. Though the weapon would fire, it was no longer the devastating tool it had been. On February 19th, at 0930 hours, Company A encountered a reinforced bunker complex halfway up the southern slope, 4 concrete bunkers connected by trenches with multiple machine gun positions and mortar crews firing from concealed pits. The 28th Marines' advance stalled. Stein moved forward with the stinger, identified the primary bunker, and opened fire. The damaged barrel meant decreased accuracy, but at close range, volume of fire still mattered, and he suppressed the position long enough for demolition teams to move forward with satchel charges. The bunker was destroyed, and Company A advanced another 50 yards. At 10:15 hours, Stein's luck changed. A Japanese grenade landed 3 feet from his position. He saw it and tried to move, but the grenade detonated before he could get clear, with shrapnel hitting his right arm, right leg, and torso. Multiple wounds, none immediately fatal, but he was bleeding heavily. Corpsmen reached him within minutes, bandaged the wounds, and called for evacuation. Stein refused. His platoon was still engaged, and the stinger was still needed. He continued fighting for the next 2 hours, providing fire support while bleeding through his bandages, the stinger continuing to function despite the beating it had taken, suppressing every pillbox that opened fire on advancing Marines and cutting down Japanese soldiers who appeared in trench systems. But by 12:30, Stein's wounds had worsened, with significant blood loss making him lightheaded and his vision narrowing. Corpsmen told him he needed immediate evacuation or he would die on the mountain. This time, Stein did not argue. He handed the stinger to another Marine in his squad and allowed Corpsmen to carry him down the mountain to the beach, from there loaded onto a landing craft and transported to a hospital ship anchored offshore. On February 21st, while Stein recovered on the hospital ship, the 28th Marines continued their assault on Mount Suribachi, with fighting so savage that every cave had to be cleared with flamethrowers and explosives, and every trench taken in close combat with Japanese soldiers fighting to the death rather than surrender. On February 23 at 10:20 in the morning, a patrol from Company E reached the summit and raised a small American flag, photographer Joe Rosenthal capturing the moment, and later a larger flag, with that image becoming the most iconic photograph of the Pacific War. Stein was not present for the flag raising. He was on the hospital ship receiving treatment for his wounds, with doctors removing shrapnel from his arm, leg, and torso, treating him for blood loss and infection, telling him he would be sent to a rear area hospital in Hawaii or possibly back to the United States. His war was over. But on February 25th, news reached the hospital ship that hit Stein harder than any grenade. The 5th Marine Division had moved north from Suribachi toward the center of the island, assaulting a position designated Hill 362A, with fighting so brutal that Company A had lost 30% of its strength in 2 days. Stein's platoon sergeant dead, his squad leader dead, and Marines he had trained with in Hawaii dying on a nameless hill. On February 26th, against medical orders, Tony Stein left the hospital ship, climbed down into a landing craft returning to the beach, told the boat crew he had been cleared to return to duty, though he had not been cleared and was AWOL, but nobody stopped him. He reached the beach at 1400 hours, found a supply sergeant and requisitioned new boots, his feet still bandaged but able to walk, grabbed an M1 Garand rifle from a supply dump, the Stinger gone, either destroyed or being used by another Marine, and walked north through Iwo Jima, 6 miles through volcanic ash, and past destroyed Japanese positions, burned out tanks and scattered equipment, past graves registration teams collecting American dead, reaching Company A's position at Hill 362A on February 27th. The company had been reduced to 63 men from its original strength of 240, survivors exhausted from 8 days of continuous combat against an enemy that refused to surrender. Stein reported to the company commander and was put back on the line immediately because Company A needed every rifle. For the next 2 days, Stein fought in brutal close-quarters combat around Hill 362A with no Stinger, just an M1 Garand and grenades, the fighting different without the improvised machine gun, but Stein still effective.
On March 1, 1945, Company A was tasked with a reconnaissance patrol to locate a complex of Japanese pillboxes that had been harassing the regiment's advance. The patrol consisted of 19 Marines, with Corporal Tony Stein designated Assistant Patrol Leader. Mission: to move forward approximately 400 yards, locate the enemy positions, and return with actionable intelligence. No assault, just reconnaissance. At 0700 on March 1st, the patrol moved out from Company A's lines through volcanic ridges and ravines perfect for ambush, with Japanese soldiers having established concealed positions throughout. Snipers, machine gun nests, mortar teams, all hidden in caves and spider holes. The patrol moved slowly, 20 yards, stop, observe, listen. 20 more yards, knowing Japanese defenders were watching, and the question was when the enemy would open fire. At 0745, the patrol reached a ridgeline overlooking a small valley, and Stein moved to the front to get a better view, through volcanic rock formations, seeing what looked like camouflaged positions, possibly pillboxes or cave entrances. The patrol needed to move closer to confirm, Stein signaling the patrol to advance with M1 Garand at the ready, his feet still bandaged from the barefoot runs 8 days earlier, aching with every step, and shrapnel wounds in his right arm and leg not fully healed. At 0752, a single shot rang out. The bullet struck Tony Stein in the head. He dropped instantly, the shot coming from a concealed position approximately 200 yards to the northeast, a spider hole or cave entrance. Corpsmen reached Stein within seconds, but there was nothing they could do. The wound was fatal. Corporal Tony Stein, aged 23, died on the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima at 0753 on March 1, 1945.
The patrol returned fire toward the suspected sniper position. Marines called in mortar support, and the area was saturated with high explosives. Whether the sniper died in the bombardment, never confirmed. The patrol completed its mission, identifying the pillbox complex and returning to Company A with intelligence, but they carried Tony Stein's body back with them. News of Stein's death spread quickly through the 28th Marines. The Barefoot Corporal, who had made 8 trips to the beach on February 19th, the Marine who had refused evacuation after being wounded, the toolmaker from Dayton who had built a weapon from salvaged aircraft parts and used it to destroy more enemy positions than anyone could count. On March 2nd, Stein was buried in the 5th Division Cemetery on Iwo Jima, with a simple wooden cross marking his grave, his service number, rank, and unit, no mention of the Stinger or the Medal of Honor that would later bear his name. The battle for Iwo Jima continued for another 24 days, with fighting remaining brutal. The 28th Marines pushing north, clearing cave complexes and fortified positions, while American casualties mounted to nearly 7,000 dead and 20,000 wounded by March 26th, when the island was finally declared secure. Japanese casualties were worse, with fewer than 1,000 survivors of the 21,000 defenders, the rest dying in their positions or committing suicide rather than surrender. But on February 19th, during those first 8 hours of combat, Tony Stein and his improvised weapon had made a difference. His barefoot runs saved 9 wounded Marines who would have died on the beach. His suppressive fire had allowed Company A to advance when other units were pinned down. His mechanical ingenuity had given the Marine Corps a weapon that for one day changed the tactical equation. The 5 other Stingers built by Mel Grevich also saw combat on Iwo Jima, with 2 destroyed by enemy fire, 1 jammed permanently from overheating, and the other 2 surviving the battle but lost in the chaos of equipment disposal after the war. None of the original 6 Stingers exist today. Field modifications and non-standard equipment, the kind of weapons the military typically destroys rather than preserves. In May 1945, Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson submitted a recommendation for Tony Stein to receive the Medal of Honor. The recommendation detailing Stein's actions on February 19th, with the 8 trips to the beach, wounded Marines evacuated, enemy positions destroyed, and barefoot runs under fire. The recommendation was endorsed by every officer in the chain of command, who reviewed the after-action reports and agreed that Corporal Tony Stein had demonstrated conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. On February 19, 1946, exactly 1 year after Stein's actions on Iwo Jima, his widow, Joan, received his Medal of Honor in a ceremony at the Ohio State House. Ohio Governor Frank Lausch presented the medal, with Joan Stein standing in his office, overwhelmed by the weight of the decoration and the memories it represented. Tony's mother rose attending, with tears streaming down her face. The Jewish immigrant's child who had dropped out of high school to work as a toolmaker, having received the nation's highest military honor. The Medal of Honor citation read in part that Stein was the first man of his unit to be on station after hitting the beach in the initial assault. Armed with a personally improvised aircraft-type weapon providing rapid covering fire, on March 1, 1945, Company A was tasked with a reconnaissance patrol to locate a complex of Japanese pillboxes that had been harassing the regiment's advance. The patrol consisted of 19 Marines, with Corporal Tony Stein designated Assistant Patrol Leader. Mission: to move forward approximately 400 yards, locate the enemy positions, and return with actionable intelligence. No assault, just reconnaissance.
At 0700 on March 1st, the patrol moved out from Company A's lines through volcanic ridges and ravines perfect for ambush, with Japanese soldiers having established concealed positions throughout. Snipers, machine gun nests, mortar teams, all hidden in caves and spider holes. The patrol moved slowly, 20 yards, stop, observe, listen, 20 more yards, knowing Japanese defenders were watching, and the question was when the enemy would open fire. At 0745, the patrol reached a ridgeline overlooking a small valley, and Stein moved to the front to get a better view, through volcanic rock formations, seeing what looked like camouflaged positions, possibly pillboxes or cave entrances. The patrol needed to move closer to confirm, Stein signaling the patrol to advance with M1 Garand at the ready, his feet still bandaged from the barefoot runs 8 days earlier, aching with every step, and shrapnel wounds in his right arm and leg not fully healed. At 0752, a single shot rang out. The bullet struck Tony Stein in the head. He dropped instantly, the shot coming from a concealed position approximately 200 yards to the northeast, a spider hole or cave entrance. Corpsmen reached Stein within seconds, but there was nothing they could do. The wound was fatal. Corporal Tony Stein, aged 23, died on the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima at 0753 on March 1, 1945. The patrol returned fire toward the suspected sniper position. Marines called in mortar support, and the area was saturated with high explosives. Whether the sniper died in the bombardment, never confirmed. The patrol completed its mission, identifying the pillbox complex and returning to Company A with intelligence, but they carried Tony Stein's body back with them. News of Stein's death spread quickly through the 28th Marines. The Barefoot Corporal, who had made 8 trips to the beach on February 19th, the Marine who had refused evacuation after being wounded, the toolmaker from Dayton who had built a weapon from salvaged aircraft parts and used it to destroy more enemy positions than anyone could count. On March 2nd, Stein was buried in the 5th Division Cemetery on Iwo Jima, with a simple wooden cross marking his grave, his service number, rank, and unit, no mention of the Stinger or the Medal of Honor that would later bear his name. The battle for Iwo Jima continued for another 24 days, with fighting remaining brutal. The 28th Marines pushing north, clearing cave complexes and fortified positions, while American casualties mounted to nearly 7,000 dead and 20,000 wounded by March 26th, when the island was finally declared secure. Japanese casualties were worse, with fewer than 1,000 survivors of the 21,000 defenders, the rest dying in their positions or committing suicide rather than surrender. But on February 19th, during those first 8 hours of combat, Tony Stein and his improvised weapon had made a difference. His barefoot runs saved 9 wounded Marines who would have died on the beach. His suppressive fire had allowed Company A to advance when other units were pinned down. His mechanical ingenuity had given the Marine Corps a weapon that for one day changed the tactical equation. The 5 other Stingers built by Mel Grevich also saw combat on Iwo Jima, with 2 destroyed by enemy fire, 1 jammed permanently